I'm going to plug, if you want to have faith, and you want to have love, and I notice our bulletin says Easter people have faith, and on the inside it says love one another. Well, I got you covered with both in this message, hopefully. But if you want stories of faith, come to the sharing service before communion service. They are amazing. So I was sitting in my car waiting for Missy. Now, anybody in a relationship, there's always one person that will always be waiting for the other. Let's just say I've had a lot of time to sit with my thoughts and think. But I glanced over at my azalea bush, and there was big fat bees getting fat on pollen, and I was struck with an idea. How fascinating life is. Next slide. Now, how did it all get started? So, I wanted to talk about the Big Bang and bees and flowers. Now, at the time of the Big Bang, there was nothing but hydrogen atoms spitting out at high speeds, and there was a whole lot of energy in the universe, and there wasn't really much going on but that hydrogen atom, one proton, one electron, the first element in the periodic table. So if you were fooled into think there would be more pictures of flowers and bees and such, I'm sorry. This is a little bit of a lecture here. But bear with me. Next slide. And I thought about how hydrogen atoms fuse together under intense heat and pressure due to gravity to form helium. And if you continue to fuse helium together with other atoms, it leads to all sorts of things, like gold and silver and uranium. Now, there's a lot of forces holding atoms together to form molecules. There's a weak nuclear force, there's a strong nuclear force, there's covalent bonds, there's ionic bonds, and there's even gravity. And gravity works on a small scale, and it works on a big scale to hold things together. Now, this is a little foreshadowing for later. But science can describe a lot of these forces that hold things together, but I'm going to argue that faith is a force that really keeps us together. Let's go back to my atoms. So if you keep combining atoms and atoms and atoms, you get eventually carbon. Next slide. Now, if you're a fan of Star Trek, the first Star Trek movie, not a very good one, but it's the first one where they're on the big screen, William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and the computer, the machines keep referring to the people as carbon-based units. It's like, that's because the human body takes carbon and makes something called long-chain fatty acids. So when you think about cholesterol is what the body uses to make cells and muscles and organs, all sorts of stuff that we need. Next slide. So the same stuff that makes coal and makes diamonds also makes us. Think about that. That's a mind bender. Next slide. And all that is produced under the pressure of stars. Now, stars get old and eventually explode, or they collide with other stars, and they release all sorts of those new molecules, and they get trapped in gravity of another star, and then, next slide, eventually they form a planet, and that planet becomes Earth, and over millions of years, things begin to grow based on that carbon that forms fatty acids and proteins, and over many millions of years, here we are. Next slide. Or a fun way to do this is just to watch the introduction to the TV show, The Big Bang Theory, all of which is pretty accurate. The Earth began to cool, the autographs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall, we built the pyramids, math, science, history, unraveling the mysteries, and it all started with the Big Bang. Next slide. And all these thoughts started with me glancing at that bush and the bees floating around and birds and other pollinators like butterflies. And I said to myself, what a miracle life is. Most every living thing that is bigger than an amoeba requires two partners to make more of that living thing. Plants and trees, animals, and especially people. And I thought about bees. I thought about how fragile is life and how are we all connected? The birds and the bugs and the bees and the butterflies and even the wind helps pollinate plants which produce seeds so that life for that plant can continue. And around that seed is a fruit that we eat. Corn, other vegetables. Sometimes we take those fruits or those beans or those seeds and we brew them into drinks like coffee. But we share our life with all those flying little critters, and we all benefit from all of it. Next slide. Now, if all the bees died, and most insects that we think are creepy and crawly and sting and bite, if they all kind of disappeared, we could still live. There's enough pollination going on, plenty of plants for us to eat, but life would not be as satisfying. So if you look at the first 3 items on there, these crops would be reduced by anywhere from 40 to 90%. So we've got apples and apricots and blueberries and mangoes and peaches, all sorts of fruits. We've got a few nuts in there, our almonds, our cashews, and then avocados. What would we do without our guac? And if you look at the bottom 3, almost all of those things would be eliminated. Pumpkins, watermelon, chocolate, vanilla. Like I said, we could still live, but life would be less satisfying. So from the creation of the building blocks of our bodies to the food we eat, and I even talked about the miracle of birth, all these things come together just so that we can be alive and come and worship on Sunday. Well, we do a little bit more than that. And if you want to talk about faith, what I just described to you sounds pretty far-fetched. But that's what science tells us. Next slide. Now we can take a step back. Maybe believe a little bit more in that whole Genesis story. God created the earth, all the plants and animals, and then us, all in 6 days, and rested on the 7th. Some people will say this is a fairy tale, and I would be very greatly offended, because no matter how this story is told, there's always some truth in it. But let me ask you, which story is harder to believe? They were all made of stardust? Or that God created us and he breathed life into us? And the truth is that it doesn't matter how we got here, not to me. What's important is that we all believe God did his part to get us here. And my faith doesn't lie in what I know or what I can measure. Science can tell us how things and what has happened and how they measured it, and they can actually predict future effects, but science can never tell us why. Why are we here? My faith lies in what I can feel. And where does that come from? It comes from the Bible. So today's reading is from John 15, verse 12. This is my command. Love each other as I have loved you. The greatest love a person shows to die for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I don't call you servants now. A servant does not know what his master is doing, but I call you friends because I have made known to you everything I heard from my Father. You did not choose me. I chose you. You are my friends, and I choose you. Jesus says, I choose you. Then he turns to his friends and says, I gave you work to do. Go and produce fruit. Jesus says, I want you to produce fruit that will last. Then the Father will give you anything you ask for in my name. Now, he's not talking about the fruit that pollinates on trees from birds and bees and butterflies, but the fruit that comes from caring for one another. Just like the apple trees and the avocado plants that are linked to pollinators, we're linked to the influences of the people and the things around us. So what does that make us? It makes us busy little bees. And I told you how fragile our physical lives are. Well, what about our spiritual lives? Jesus finishes by saying in verse 17, this is my command, love each other. How do we show God we love? Well, actually, how do we show that we love God? How do we show that we love each other? Jesus tells us if we love God, we will follow his commandments, but there's only one real commandment. Love one another. If we have love, everything else flows naturally from that. Change your heart, change the world. Now that I've gone through all that background, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to tell you a real story of faith. I received a text after church 2 weeks ago, and the text reads, "I got your name from PJ. My wife is in the hospital and she's in terrible pain." They were from a congregation down southern Ohio, and I'm hoping that you can come administer to her. Now, I've heard these stories in the church. You know, you get prepared for this as you go through your trainings to become part of the priesthood. You hear these wonderful testimonies. But wherever you might be, you can reach out to someone at a local congregation, and they will be there for you. Maybe you need a ride from the airport or a place to stay overnight, or maybe a visit to the hospital. And there are two stories of faith right here. This couple had the faith to reach out and ask for God's blessing. So I contacted Ruth when we went to Grant Hospital. And it's not always healing that we're praying for. Sometimes it's just a comfort to know that God is with you and that God loves you. And the other act of faith was in myself. Am I ready to be part of this sacrament? Am I worthy? Well, the answer is if God was waiting for everyone to be ready and worthy, then nothing would get done. I follow my faith where it leads me, and on that day it said, "Ready or not, here I am." Faith is like diving into the deep end of the pool for the first time. You go and you trust God will be with you. Just like that couple trusted to reach out and ask us, strangers, not really strangers, because we all have a common belief. And that common belief that God willing, we could help them. And I can tell you that after 5 days in the hospital, they're back home and doing well. And they're also planning on getting a group together in the fall to go to the Kirtland Temple, and they'd like to get to know some of us. So connections to one another, just as Jesus told his friends 2,000 years ago. Love one another. And that's where the true faith lies. And it's how we're all connected. It's all connected to everything that is made, everything that has grown, everything that flies, and to each other. So I guess, as the bees say, let's get buzzing. Thank you.